So thank you all so much for coming today to participate in our workshop, our virtual workshop, and a huge thank you to Lilliana. So I'm going to give a little background about Lilliana. She was kind enough to do a workshop for My Face in January. And then due to the current events with COVID-19 and school closures and remote learning, we've asked her to join us again to do another workshop. So Lilliana is an attorney at Advocates for Children. She supervises the work of the Parent Center project, which provides information and legal representation to New York City families on education-related matters. Lilliana is originally from Puerto Rico, and she's fluent in Spanish and French. So Lilliana, a huge thank you. Thank you so much. And we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. All right, so I'm Lilliana, and I'm going to now put on some slides just to help focus the conversation. So let's see how it goes. If you are having a hard time looking at the slides,
join the meeting
in the chat so that I can then work with our technology and you're not left without. So I'm not going to go through this entire presentation because I really do want to get your questions. I'm going to highlight some of the parts of the presentation, and some I'm going to go pretty quickly throughout. Hold on. All right. So bear with me while I click through. First, I wanted to let you know about Advocates for Children. So we're an independent agency that works all throughout all New York City's 5 boroughs. And what we do is we protect the educational rights of all New York City students. We are virtually open. So you can try to reach out to us if you have questions, or you can go to advocatesforchildren.org to get guides and resources. Because remember, even if we are now living through a crisis, a lot of your rights have not changed or been waived because of this momentary gap in our regular lives. And we will go back to some sort of normal life after this is over. So that means that although New York is on pause, your rights are not. And if you need supports and if you have questions, please reach out to us. Our services are free. I will email this presentation later so that you can have all of these shots and you don't have to worry about writing everything down. I promise you I will send them to Dina later on. Okay, fair enough. We just like puppies. So let me just show that for a second. And moving on to the next. In the PowerPoint slides that you will get in the next few days, I'll send it after today, but when you get it and you're able to open it, I wanted to share some general resources. A lot of these resources are available on the landing page of our website, but I wanted to highlight some just general supports that seem to be working for some families that we were working with. So visual planners for children who need graphic organizers or need supports to be able to keep a structured day. I actually find it very useful. And then books for people with learning barriers. So these are books that are adaptive for different sorts of needs. And then this one's Nap and Read. I think there is a fee associated with that, and I have to check. But I like it because it reads accessible and inaccessible text out loud. It levels vocabulary and it translates. So this is something that if you can or if you want to get creative with a special education program and you require it, I imagine that it could be part of an assistive technology plan for your child. So we included it there. And then I'll move on from this. I wanted to speak about the regional enrichment centers as well, which are centers where students whose parents are essential workers, such as people who work in healthcare, grocery, pharmacy, food services, transit, and first responders, can physically go and receive a full day of supports, either instructional supports and enrichments. They run from 7:30 in the morning until 6 o'clock in the afternoon. They're sort of a secret location site because they just don't want parents who are working but who are not essential workers to come off and drop off their kids. Plus, they have to have appropriate ratios. They're not, the classroom size is 6 students per classroom size, so that there is enough distance to maintain social distancing and safety for COVID emergency. If you are one of these essential workers and you need childcare, please, when you receive this PowerPoint presentation, click on the blue live link, and it will tell you, it will take you to a form where you can fill out, request it, and then they will get in touch with you. Okay? So hopefully this is something to do. I'm going to go over very quickly. The Department of Education has been offering free grab-and-go meals for every single New York City resident. You do not have to be a student. If you live in New York and you need a meal, you can go and pick up all 3 meals at once, all meals that you need for every single member of your family. So if you're a 5-member household, you can pick up breakfast, lunch, and dinner for all 5 members of your household in a very single stop. There are times for this. So if you're a member of a family with a school-aged child, you go earlier, 7:30 in the morning until 11:30 in the afternoon. And for adults who do not have students, then 11:30 to 1:30. There are vegetarian halal options available. Tomorrow, because we have a holiday on Monday, if you remember that there are days off, now that we're full-time for most of us at home, you should pick up your meals, your Monday's meal tomorrow, okay? Also, for those of you who receive SNAP benefits or who receive free breakfast and lunch in school, just this morning there was an article on Chalkbeat, I'm looking for it just to make sure I get the information right, saying that every public school family who receive breakfast, free meals in school or reduced meals in school should receive at least $421 in food assistance because they were unable to get these meals in school and may not have been able to access the meal hubs that the Department of Education is running. To find out the location of the meal hubs, you can text meals or, food or comida to 877-877, or you can follow the blue link tomorrow when you receive this PowerPoint presentation, okay? Or you can ask me and I can look it up for you later. Let me see, so far so good? All right, now really for what we came here for. So for the time being, all instruction is really remote unless you are an essential worker and you are able to go into the REC centers. Every single piece of instruction that you're receiving for the most part is remote. iPads with data plans on loan are still being distributed even at this late time. So there should be 1 device per child. It's not 1 device per family. So if you still are in need of a device, please fill out the remote learning device survey so that you are able to then make the request and receive it. Those devices should come with paid data plans so that you don't have to rely on whether you have Wi-Fi or if it's working. They should be ready to go for you. If you have difficulty getting these, you can also request forms at the grab-and-go meal hubs, or you can call 718-935-5100, option 5, okay? If you're having difficulty connecting with technology or your iPad is not working, please connect with the school first. The school can then email remote-learning@schools.nyc.gov for supports. You can also call the Department of Education's help desk. The number is the same as I mentioned before, 718-935-5100. You can call 311. You can call Apple Care with a specific PIN number. They will provide information for you remotely. They will not come over personally to help you, but I find that they're very good at walking through troubleshooting. And when there is a problem, then they will replace the iPad. Okay? So far, so good. If I'm going too quickly, please let me know. If I'm going too slowly, please let me know. And if there are questions at any time during my conversation, also just ask the questions. I'm more than happy to answer them. All right. So what are schools doing? What are they doing? What type of instructional supports should you be getting? Each school building was really left to figure that part out. So instruction may vary very, greatly from one school building to the next. For the most part, we are seeing a lot of interactive online instruction, as well as links to web-based instructional supports, platforms like Xeron for math or Lalingo for phonetics, for reading instruction, or just different platforms that teachers have found and are implementing. But you can also request paper packets if you're having a hard time accessing the services, or if if teachers are requesting that you print materials out and you do not have the technology at home, or you do not have a printer, or you do not have a toner. You can request that that those pieces come in physically, so that your child can access the services same as any other child. We're seeing an increase in live instruction and check-ins. So teachers are trying to connect with their groups. They're doing also full classroom visits, so that time, either through Zoom or Google Meets or Microsoft Teams, whatever the platform the teacher is using, so that they can see the child. Now, of course, this is not a substitute for one-to-one instruction. We have seen reports of students who need additional supports getting those services, and we have also heard the opposite. Students who need additional supports because they're not understanding the instruction given either via online platform or through a small recorded live instruction, not being able to access what they need to make progress in general. So first, Sogan. Now, the platforms used are, right now we see a lot of Google Hangouts and chats and Google Classroom, Microsoft Teams, and I am so sorry, Zoom is back. I don't know why that appears as no more Zoom. For a while, Zoom wasn't being allowed because of some safety concerns. Zoom bombing, which is when an unauthorized person enters what's supposed to be a safe classroom and then does things that are unsavory, had been reported, but apparently those things have been fixed and Zoom is allowed again, which is great because it's actually very accessible to a lot of devices. The link that I'm highlighting here sends you to the most comprehensive list of Department of Education technical tools and support, which is not a very extensive list, but it's a very good place to start if you're looking for support, accessing services, installing apps in your device, or reporting problems. So this is a troubleshooting link. All right. We may get to these general issues later, but I really wanted to get to issues that students with disabilities are seeing right now. So IEPs are being held by phone. There's also some video conferencing happening. If you need an IEP meeting, please do not waive the IEP meeting. You can still have your IEP meeting. We are seeing also reports of parents being told, wait, we'll do it later. If you want your meeting, please request a meeting. If you have been scheduled for a meeting and you want to hold it, please have the meeting. There's no reason to waive it. For evaluations, it might be a little tricky. Of course, if you need evaluations for your child, evaluations are still happening. The timeline for evaluations have not changed. If you need a new evaluation for something or if you had scheduled evaluations, you can have them. You do not need to waive them. There may be some technology needs that you might need to have to be able to have your child evaluated at home. But in the same way that they are doing evaluations in person, they can do it. They were doing evaluations in person. They can do them online following certain protocols. Okay, so please, if you need them, do not waive them. Please request them because they are still happening. Now, every single student with an IEP should have received a remote learning plan. Now, a remote learning plan is a summary of the supports and services that are going to be provided remotely while schools are closed because of this COVID emergency. I'll show you an example of what a remote learning plan looks like, but it's supposed to give you a guide as to how it is that this IEP that you created with the Department of Education is going to be distilled and offered to your child remotely, okay? If you look at remote learning plan, or if you have not received a remote learning plan, please raise those concerns early so that anything that needs to be troubleshot can get fixed as quickly as possible. I mentioned timelines a little bit earlier. So the timelines for implementing an IEP, that is for a new IEP to become in effect, has been extended. And that means that if there is a recommendation for a small classroom size in a new IEP, that there is a longer timeline before you receive your placement offer, for example, because schools are closed right now. But the time process for the Department of Education to respond to your requests for an evaluation or your request for a meeting has not changed. Of course, you can waive your rights. I would recommend that you do not if you're seeking services. If you feel that your child needs additional services now, this is also a time for you to request a meeting so that you can include those services and then create a remote learning plan based on that new IEP. The federal law has not changed. There's been some rumors as to certain pieces that may be tweaked, but nothing has changed as of right now. So far, so good? Okay. All right, so this is a sample that we received for one of our clients, and we have permission to share it with you, of a special education remote learning plan. This is not an IEP. This is a summary of the instructional supports that this particular student is going to receive while they're home and the schools are closed. So as you can see, it has a little bit of student information on this part and the disability classification. It's going to ask if the student needs assistive technology and the specifics of it, and if they have the technology at home, because if they do not have the technology at home, the Department of Education has to supply it. Okay, oops, sorry. And then it talks about what you can expect at home, which is really what we need to know. What can I expect while I'm at home? So for this case, they have one-on-one video conferencing for English, 45 minutes per session, 3 sessions per week. And then for math, the same thing, occupational therapy, 4 times a week in a 45-minute session, speech therapy, etc. And I just checked in with this family earlier this week. They are receiving the services. Sometimes Wi-Fi was spotty and they didn't, but they are receiving teletherapies. I checked in with another family for counseling services to see, so counseling services are taking place also virtually with certain conditions met, such as an area where the student can speak privately for this particular student, and then a device that they can use just to hear and speak into, so a headset. Okay, so they do exist, and each person who needs and who has an IEP should have received one of these. If you haven't, please make sure you request it. I went over this a little bit earlier, but I just wanted to highlight if you have the technology at home and do you have those tools at home, because if the answer is no and you need them, all right, and we went with this. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the related services are being offered as appropriate through teletherapies. The only related service that I have not seen, but rumored to be happening, is the one-to-one paraprofessionals for disruptive behaviors or other supports. There is a rumor that they should be, well, technically they should be provided, but I have not heard yet of anyone actually receiving the service. They should fall under the one-to-one nurses and one-to-one services, instructional support and behavioral supports. If a child received that in the IEP, they should have some sort of comparable service at home. We can figure something out if this is your case to see if a child may be entitled to it. But for the most part, there are no in-person services. Assistive technology, which is the use of any tool that may support instruction. In this case, of course, the devices for to access also communication tools, assistive technology that was used in school to support a child's instruction, be it through fidgets or processing or computer programs. If they were available in school and a student needed them to learn and to participate in class, a similar service should be offered at home. And then what about missed services? So during this time, there have been, obviously, there's some times where things don't work out as expected and services are missed for whatever reason. We're not quite sure how compensatory services are going to be offered, which is services in compensation for missed services. So you lost your services, you're entitled to those services, and those services should be provided at a later time. We anticipate that there will be some sort of guidance coming down to explain how exactly families can recuperate any time or service lost. But right now I don't have anything to share about what the protocol might be. The main thing is that if it's not working, please ask for help because don't assume that it's just the way it is. The Department of Education should be offering the supports that your child needs to maintain and develop and progress at home. It's tricky, but it's doable. Okay. We're not going to cover language access unless you need me to. So right now I just wanted you to, I'm going to go back to this piece, the remote learning plan, and leave it there. And then I should take some questions as to anything that you guys, even if I didn't mention it. Yesterday, Dina had mentioned that some of you were concerned about summer instruction and how that was going to be provided. So in the same way that students who are not ready for the next year may be, whose promotion may be in doubt, students who are not ready for the next year and who have not met promotional standards may be held back. I believe that, in this case, parents may make a request to have their student receive some remote summer learning because, as we know, the Department of Education announced that all summer instruction is going to continue remotely for those students who qualify. And students who qualify are those whose teachers recommend them for summer school instructional services and supports. So remedial supports to enable them to be ready for next year. The dates for summer schools have changed slightly. So from the 3rd grade to 8th grade, which is summer school really begins in the 3rd grade, you have July 6th through August 11th is when summer school will be held by the Department of Education. They mentioned that for those grades, it will be 4 days a week. But from 9th grade to 12th grade, July 6th through August 14th, and for those, that will be 5-day instruction. And again, by recommendation of the teacher for additional supports. For students with 12-month IEPs, the summer programming should also occur remotely with minor exceptions, July 2nd through August 13th. Questions? Otherwise, it's just me talking, and that's not really fun.
Thank you, Liliana. So we have a couple of questions that came up, so I'll just sort of start from the beginning, if that's okay.
Perfect.
So one parent had said, my biggest issue is that class size is not differentiated in remote learning. So our experience feels as though our child was thrown into a general education classroom with related services. That's one part. And the second part of her question is, our child is left to learn from pre-recorded lessons and YouTube videos, and she's wondering how can he progress, or how can progress be measured if there's not an interaction with the actual teacher?
Well, I'm going to make some assumptions, and please correct me if I'm wrong about this, that this specific child is not intended to be in a general education classroom, and they are required to receive supports from a special education teacher. That's still supposed to happen. So even if there is a special education teacher providing recorded or live instruction to a group of more than what was your ratio, that's not allowed, because the individualized support that is required for that teacher to be able to answer those questions is not present in that type of live instruction. And it is not the same to have 30 little faces than 12 little faces that are looking at the teacher and trying to get support. Second, parents can and students can reach out to a special education teacher for additional supports. They have the difficulty with the specific instruction, the specific module that the teacher is presenting. And yes, that support needed to be differentiated for students. So just because we're going remote does not mean that that right to a special education support and modified instruction has gone away. It is quite the opposite. That continues. I'm also going to assume that you did not get the remote learning plan, and you probably should request one to see what's supposed to be offered. If your child is not thriving, to use a very strong term, using recorded instruction and needs additional supports, then this is something that you can make a request for and say, some children do really well with recorded instructions that they can review once over at their own pace, but not every child works in the same way. So for a specific child who needs specific supports to be able to make progress in the specific instruction that the teacher is providing, they should get individualized support from that teacher or from a specialist who can then offer that piece. But those supports do need to be incorporated into some sort of learning plan or program. Otherwise, they're just extras. I would suggest to the person whose child is receiving general ed instruction instead of special ed instruction, you can reach out to us, because we can escalate that and say this is an inappropriate way of receiving services for a child whose IEP clearly recommends a small class size. If I didn't answer the question, please let us know. And then, did I cover the question? I know there were a couple of parts.
Yeah, and so the second part of the question was, how can progress be measured if there's no actual interaction with the teacher? I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
Well, it's really, I don't know, because it varies from school to school. So for those schools that are using remote online platforms for specific subjects, they're recording the child's progress and grading them pretty much based on the system that platform is using. So Zern comes to mind because my kids are using Zern in their school, which is a math program. And so they're expected to reach a certain level by grade. And if they reach that level, then they're meeting standards, below standard, exceeding standards. That's one way of doing it. In terms of anything else, they haven't really submitted. They have different platforms where they need to submit work. So some teachers in general education programs are using project-based grading, but I don't know how that's going to translate at the end of the year. There's been a lot of leeway provided to teachers and also students, so that grading is not entirely flexible, but that, you know, they're looking more at readiness right now than at actual grade work. We had a report of a teacher who was requesting that parents grade their children and submit grades to her, which, I mean, I'm not going to speak my mind, but you could probably read my thoughts. I thought that was wildly inappropriate, to be mild. That is to say, I don't know how teachers are going to be doing this. I can tell you that the promotional, since we're going to be talking about this, let me just go back 1 second. It's going to be based as usual, credits and schoolwork, whatever that means. That's an incomplete answer, but I'm so sorry, that is the best I can give you right now.
And then kind of related to that question, Liliana, another parent had asked if teachers can be held more accountable for virtual lessons, such as like gym and theater and art, versus having the parent having to do all of that themselves, sort of lead all those classes themselves or lessons themselves.
So again, the experience varies very wildly from person to person, child to child, family to family. Some kids are great and do so well remotely that there's no need for parental supports. I'm not one of those parents. And then there's others where there's the need for more intensive instruction. How to hold a teacher more accountable? It's tricky and it's hard. I think when we say speak up and speak up early, I think that if you're finding that your child is not progressing and not performing as you would expect with the current instruction, that you speak up and you tell the teacher, look, this isn't working and this is why it's not working. What other supports do you think are available? And then copy the school to say this isn't working. I need additional supports for my specific child's needs. It's helpful if you have in specific language from your IEP that says that your child needs something a little bit more structured, a different way of learning, a different way of presenting information, such as chunking, so dividing information into chunks and then providing it to a child. It is helpful if they have something like scaffolding, which is offering supports as a child is learning and then removing them, like a scaffold would support a building. Multisensory instruction, which means that you are, means a number of different things, but that the instructional supports can have different ways of presenting the information using different sensorial techniques. What else? That's a really bad explanation, the multisensory, forgive me, but my words have left me. So using the specific language on your IEP, I've been saying specific a lot, I'm sorry. The language on your IEP, on your child's IEP might be helpful. And again, if that language is not there, this is not a bad time to create it too. We're not sure when this is going to end. I hope that that helps a little bit.
Okay. And then a question we actually received last week from a parent in our parent group was just related to sort of your thoughts about the fall. So I know everything is still sort of up in the air, but in terms of, you know, if schools, if students are allowed to return to school and sort of just, I guess, parental rights about making that decision and if they decide it's not safe for their child to go to school based on their own child's medical condition, like how do you foresee that being, like how do you foresee the school system accommodating those parents and families at home still?
So I think this specific, I'm going to speak about New York City in particular, there hasn't been a plan that has been outlined for the fall. Other school districts and nationally, they're looking at mixes of remote and in-person instruction. For us working parents, that's a disaster. They're also speaking about full remote instruction if the emergency continues. In New York Post states that the last opening that will happen will be education and entertainment. Because of the high density of students. I don't know, and it is my personal opinion that when we return in September, we may experience a late start to the new year and that there will be some sort of remote instructional aspect to what we're going to be doing because of the fear of the second wave. I think there's also going to be some flexibility in attendance and some flexibility, as we're seeing now, in how grades are being determined and how projects are going to be, how instructional supports are going to be sent out. But this is all real speculation. Imagine if tomorrow a vaccine comes up, or if it just goes away, then hopefully we'll go back to school. That's unlikely to happen. If you need to be prepared for the fall, I would anticipate that some of this will continue and stretch out into the fall until the emergency ends, whenever that is. But we've been hearing so many things from so many different districts that it's almost impossible to plan. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you. And just a question to the group, if you guys want to throw out a few more questions, we still have time. So please send messages through the chat feature and we can ask Lilliana those questions.
I do want to highlight, if you are doing daily online instruction, please mark yourselves present. So if your child is not checking off that I'm here box in Google Classrooms or in Teams, or the teacher has not done roll call, make sure that attendance is kept, because that may impact later on promotion. And if you're applying to middle and you're in a transition point, the attendance is not really used for, it's not supposed to be used for the applications, but mark yourself present just in case.
And Lilliana, sort of a general question for Advocates for Children. What has sort of been like the #1 question or request that you guys have been getting recently since remote learning has started?
I think we've gotten so many different questions and so many different aspects. I think the first one is really, it's shifted from week to week, from how do I get instruction? How am I supposed to teach my child at home? And then moving on to more survival things. So how do I get food? I'm having housing insecurity. I'm experiencing financial insecurity. And then, more mental health related questions. And then now we're going into, a lot of parents are really tired of this. It's not, it's a marathon, and it's very difficult to, under the best of circumstances. I am happy to report that we're starting to see more questions that we would see before the COVID crisis started, which is questions about, my IEP meeting is coming up, how do I prepare? I need an evaluation, how do I get that evaluation? So sort of preparing for next year, for September. And I find that very hopeful, because now parents are looking and saying, okay, this is kind of what's happening now. We're dealing with it. We're managing as best as we can, but I need to prepare for the next step, because this is going to end. And when it ends, we want to be ready. So I think hopefully we'll continue in that path of, let's prepare for it when we open and have it all ready so that we can recuperate, or try to recuperate the time lost. And there are pieces that are really difficult, such as students who are required to receive constant supports, wraparound supports throughout the school day, that are not receiving those services, that fall, who have the risk of regressing if they do not continue receiving structured supports. How do we make sure that those students maintain what they have learned throughout this long extended closure? I think that's kind of like what I'm the most worried about, which are these students who are the most vulnerable and the ones that are going to be required more supports as they return to the new opening.
And Lilliana, we got a few more questions that just came in.
Okay, great.
So another question from a parent is, what is the process if you want to change your child's school during this remote learning period?
So if you, it's very difficult to transfer from one school to the next. I'm assuming this is not a transition point that you're going from applying to kindergarten or going to a new middle school or going through the high school application process. You're just dissatisfied with your current school and want to go to a different school. It's really hard if you are in, if your child is going to first grade, if you're in the very early years, or if you're not in your zone school, you can reapply for first grade so that your child can then go through an application process for first grade and then try to change schools in that way. If you're not in your zone school and you would like to be in your zone school, then you can register in your zone school. If the school is not at capacity, you can try that way. If you're receiving special education services in a structured program, small class size, in a specialized program, in a community school, and you feel that that program is not working for your child, you can reject the program, the class, the placement itself in writing, saying the program, a 12 to 1-to-1 classroom setting at PS5 is inappropriate to meet my child's needs. My child is not making progress in that classroom setting. Please offer me another. That you can do. For general education changes, that's a lot more complicated and they're virtually impossible. You can contact the parent coordinator for the school that you're interested in and see if they are able to accommodate you. But for the most part, you know, transfers are hard. There's a number of different types of transfers that include guidance transfers for students who have who are experiencing bullying or other difficult situations at the school and want a fresh start somewhere else. There are transfers because of transportation, so the school is too far and it takes you too long to get to where you need to be. There are transfers allowed for family reunification if you have siblings in different schools and need for them to be together, just so that you don't go nuts trying to take one child to one school or the other and get everybody on time. Those are possible. Those are some different options, but we can always speak one-to-one, or you can email me and we can go over your specific situation to see if there are any possibilities. Okay. It's just very general, sorry.
Thank you. So another question is, what would the process be from the Department of Education remote learning to actually, I guess, so the parent wants to know they want to potentially change from DOE remote learning to actually just homeschooling independently. So the question is, would services be forfeited if you transition out of DOE remote learning to just homeschooling?
So homeschooling is something, so for those of you who do not know what homeschooling is when you create a state-approved plan to provide instruction to your child yourself at home. There's tons of homeschooling supports out there. If you are homeschooling a child, you do not give up your related services because the placement then becomes your home. So you are providing services to your child. But the related services like speech therapy, occupational therapy, counseling, I'm blanking, but you get my point. Physical therapy, occupational therapy, counseling, etc., can be offered to you through a homeschooling program as well. I mean, you have to have an IEP. It's just the placement will not be offered at the Department of Education. If you are going to go that route, be very specific that you need to have your homeschooling plan, and you can do this through the Department of Education, and that you wish to continue receiving the related services, and that the Department of Education will offer you information as to where to receive those services, because they're not necessarily going to be offered at home. They might tell you to go to a public school that's offering the services, or to a center that's offering the services, or a specific site where the provider has an office, for example, that may be offering the services.
Okay. And then another question is, if a parent feels their child is not ready to be promoted to the next grade, what can they do for that? Like, how can they advocate for the child to actually repeat the grade?
That's tricky. We've gotten a lot of questions about that. And I don't think I have a clear answer to give other than try to request summer school supports, because if a child is not ready to proceed to move on to the next year, to articulate to the next grade, the Department of Education should be offering that summer support. And like I said, summer school is going to be offered by teacher recommendation for a child whose promotion is in doubt. I don't know that if you make a request to hold a child back in their current year, that it might be granted, unless a child fails the year. And that may be you skip summer school and you are then forced to be held over. I don't have an answer because it can also vary so wildly from child to child that to give a general recommendation or even an answer might not be helpful. So look at your own specific situation and discuss it with the teacher. When you have a child who had been struggling at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, and you were aware of that circumstance, and the teacher was aware of that circumstance, that might give you a stronger footing to say, look, this was happening before, and this has just made it worse. Could we talk about summer school, or are we talking about repeating the year? I don't know how it's going to play out.
Another parent had asked if you're waiting for reimbursement from for private schools, is the wait longer now because of you know, all the restrictions with COVID-19 and delays with the Board of Ed?
So if you already have a stipulation of settlement that has been signed, and that is when you have agreed to settle your claim against the Department of Education for tuition payment of a private school, then those should proceed as typical. But if you're still in a negotiating process, yes, it's taking longer. I do quite a bit of those, and there's new language to be incorporated. There's just a general slowness to the process that was already slow. So yes, we're experiencing that. For those of you who have this situation, it is even more important that you mark yourself present each time you receive remote services from the school, because that attendance does count towards the number of attendance, days attended, that then goes into if a school gets fully funded or if they get prorated, whereas you are responsible for full payment.
Thank you. Another question is, a child was approved for, as a younger child in CPSE. So they were approved for CPSE in January, but the child did not get a speech provider until just recently, a few weeks ago. So once remote services started, so the question is from the parent, can I request that my child get compensatory services now that she has a provider?
Yeah, so from the date that the services were supposed to be arranged, and the IEP has a date of implementation, right on the first page, it should tell you when the IEP was intended to be implemented. Until the time that you received services, all those services are back owed, and they can be retroactively offered to you, yes, through compensatory services. You can also make a request to the Department of Education, just flat out saying, I have counted that they missed X weeks of supports, and now I would like to schedule an equal amount of sessions through this new provider that we found. And that could be extending the services through the summer. If a child does not receive typically those services over the summer, or adding additional sessions if a child has a 12-month program.
Thank you. And another question is about a child that would be entering pre-K in September. So I guess if remote learning is still happening at that point, what services and accommodations are being offered for children in that age group?
That's a really general question. I don't know what they will be doing in the fall, but and it's hard to answer because I just don't know how things are going to change now. I mean, in a regular day, I would tell you whatever is on your IEP has to be offered in the way that it is described. And I insist that that continues to be true because the rights, the special education rights have not changed except for the implementation of the IEP, which may be later. So what that means is that at the beginning of September, you may have exactly what was on your IEP ready to go, or the pause may be extended to include preschool services, and then you find yourself doing remote preschool services, which are happening, by the way. It's not a satisfactory answer. Just generally, just in general, know that whatever appears on your child's IEP has to be offered. It's a mandate. It's not a favor. It's not, let me think about this. If it's written on your IEP, it has to be offered. How COVID-19 might affect that, we'll see. But you're still entitled to everything that's there.
Okay. And another parent had shared that they had their child's most recent IEP meeting the Friday before the schools closed. So the last meeting was really just for quote unquote the normal school program, and there was no remote plan. So the parent was wondering, now that it's, you know, almost June, what do you recommend since there's, you know, limited time left in the school year?
So every single child who has an IEP should have received a remote learning plan. So even if your IEP was created the day before school closing, well, lucky you, make a request for that remote learning plan. We still have time in the school year. I mean, we're May what? I don't remember what date it is today. May 21st. We still have about a month of implementing this. Plus, you need to know what services are owed to your child, what modifications may need to be implemented if your child is testing remotely. And also, if the pause extends beyond the summer, we don't know. Or if COVID returns and we go into another pause, you need to know what services you're entitled to so that you can plan. But these are things that you were required to receive. And I know most of the people who are listening whose children have IEPs have not received the remote learning plans. But just know that you can request one and that these should be offered to you so that you have clarity. And for those of you who came late, this is what a remote learning plan looks like. And it summarizes what you're going to be getting, when you're going to be getting them, you know, I mean, how often and how long the sessions are going to be.
Thank you. Another question just came in. So if someone's child has not yet had an IEP developed, can the school system decide not to include things that the child may need due to concerns that the school cannot actually meet those needs because of COVID-19?
No, the IEP needs to be created in a perfect world where we have all this information about this child, and if we had all the resources in the world, what does this child need to make progress in the areas where they have a disability? And so what is supposed to be looked at is just, what does my child need? And what do the evaluations recommend? What do the experts say? What cannot be considered is, how much does this cost? Is it available? Do we have it? Or where can we find this? Those considerations are not considerations for the IEP meeting. What really needs to be answered is, what does your child need to be able to make progress? And that's it. And if the schools are closed, that is not what the IEP needs to consider, okay? The IEP needs to consider when your child receives services, what is the way in which those services can be offered: small classroom, larger classroom, related services, therapies, so that your child can make progress. This is going to end someday. And these IEPs have to reflect a child's needs, not the crisis.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you, Liliana. So we still have a few minutes left. Does anyone else have any other questions they want to ask? Or any other topics that they want Liliana to touch upon?
So hopefully this was helpful and you got some questions answered. And if you have more questions, just reach out. Like I said, I'm going to be forwarding this PowerPoint presentation to Dina after I fix some typos that I just noticed. And you will have live links. But you can reach out to us at any given point if you have other thoughts, other concerns, something comes up later, somebody asks you a question, and share this information with your friends and family if you think that they would be able to use it. Okay.
Liliana, thank you so much for doing this. And I think it's been really helpful for a lot of us. So thank you.
It's always my pleasure. And, you know, anytime I'll leave you guys with our information. But like I said, I'm going to send this to you, to Dina.
And I'll make sure to share it with everybody.
And there's some faces that I recognize from previous meetings. It's really nice to see that you guys are doing well and stay healthy.
So, thank you so much again for presenting on this topic, Liliana, and thank you everyone for joining. I guess we'll sort of just wrap up, and if you don't get the email from Dina within the next couple of days with the PowerPoint information, just reach out and let her know. And if you have any other further questions for Dina or myself, you know, please let us know.